Happy Easter, everyone. Today is a day where we celebrate some great news. We celebrate the news that Jesus is risen from the dead and that he's alive. I can't think of any better news than that to celebrate. Our Bible story today comes from John 19 through 20. And we're going to be thinking about good news and how we can share that good news with others. Well, if your parents came to you and said, hey, a new law has been passed and it requires us to give you $100 allowance at a minimum every week. That means they'd have to give you at least $100 a week. That would be great news, wouldn't it? Sadly, there's no law like that. But the good news that we are going to talk about from John 19 and 20 really did happen. Well, first, our Bible lesson today starts with some harder news. After Jesus was arrested and sentenced to die, he was forced to carry his own cross to Golgotha, the place of the skull. He was crucified between two criminals. Above his head was a sign proclaiming him the King of the Jews. But he wasn't treated at all like a king. He was abused. His clothes were taken from him by soldiers, and some people mocked him and laughed at him. His family and friends, of course, were very sad and probably cried for him. Now, the Jewish leaders didn't want the crucified bodies to stay up on the crosses for the Sabbath day. They wanted those bodies to be taken down. And so the soldiers came to take the bodies down. And when they got to Jesus' body, they saw that he was already dead. But just to be sure, one of the soldiers thrust his sword into Jesus' side to prove that he was dead. So we know from that account that Jesus actually was dead when he was taken down from the cross. Nicodemus and Joseph from Arimathea prepared Jesus' body for burial, and they took his body and they placed it in a tomb, and then they took a large rock and put that rock in front of the tomb. And then, as an added measure of security, the Jewish officials wanted the Roman government to secure this tomb, and so the tomb had a seal across it. So a seal was a cord that was stretched across, and it was sealed, had a special marking on it that told everybody nobody should mess with this. It's kind of like when you see, yellow caution tape around an area where there's construction. They're trying to warn you to stay away. Well, they didn't want anyone messing with this tomb at all. They wanted that tomb to be left alone. Well, on the first day of the week, John chapter 20, 1 and 2 tells us that Mary Magdalene, one of Jesus' followers, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early while it was still dark. And she saw that the stone had been removed, which I'm sure surprised her because nobody was supposed to mess with that tomb, remember? So she ran to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one that Jesus loved, and said to them, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him." So she didn't immediately think that he had been resurrected. She just thought maybe somebody had taken his body. Maybe they had moved it for some reason. So Peter and the other disciple, the one that Jesus loved. Now, most Bible scholars think that the one that Jesus loved or the other disciple is John. And because he's written this gospel and doesn't refer to himself by name, he uses that term, the other disciple, instead of using his own name. So John and Peter run to the tomb. They start running, but John outruns Peter, and he gets there first, and he reaches the tomb first, and he bends over and he looks in, and he sees strips of linen lying there, and he sees that they're neatly folded. And it's interesting that they're neatly folded, because if someone did come and steal Jesus' body, they probably wouldn't take time to stop and fold the cloths nice and neatly. Well, then Simon Peter comes along right behind John, and he goes straight into the tomb. He sees the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth is still lying in the place where Jesus' head would have been, separate from the linen. And then finally, the other disciple, John, who had reached the tomb first, also went inside. And they saw that there was no body there. Jesus wasn't there. Well, they don't know too much what to think about this. One of the disciples believes Jesus is risen. The other one just doesn't know what to think. And so they run back to the other disciples. But Mary Magdalene stays there. She stays by the tomb. And she's crying. And a man comes up. And she mistakes him for the gardener. She thinks he's the gardener. And she thinks maybe he'll know where Jesus is, what they've done with his body. And so she says, "Where is his body? What have you done with him?" But when the man who is Jesus, of course, calls her name. When he says Mary, she recognizes that it's Jesus, and she's so excited about that because this is great news. Well, Jesus, over the next 50 days, appeared to his disciples and to many other people. Many people saw Jesus, and the good news that Jesus had risen from the dead started spreading all over the world. Well, of course, it was very hard for some people to believe that Jesus had actually risen from the dead, because most people don't rise from the dead, of course. And so here's a short video that is going to give you some amazing, hard-to-believe facts. So I hope you enjoy this little video about amazing and hard-to-believe facts.
Number 25. Lobsters don't grow old and die. In fact, as far as scientists can tell, they only die of external causes. Number 24. Saturn's rings are only between 30 and 300 feet thick. Number 23. If you eat a polar bear liver, you will die. Humans can't handle that much vitamin A. Number 22. Honey does not spoil. You could feasibly eat 5,000-year-old honey. Number 21. If you were to remove all of the empty space from the atoms that make up every human on Earth, the entire world population could fit into an apple. Number 20. A mantis shrimp can swing its claw so fast it boils water around it and creates a flash of light. Number 19. There are more possible iterations of a game of chess than there are atoms in the known universe. Number 18. A full head of human hair is strong enough to support 12 tons. Number 17. Dead people can get goosebumps. Number 16. There are more confirmed deaths from drowning in molasses than from coyote attacks. 21 people died in the 1919 Boston molasses disaster. Only 2 fatal coyote on human attacks have been confirmed. Number 15. If you could fold a piece of paper in half 42 times, it would reach the moon, assuming it's of average thickness, or about 0.01 centimeters. Number 14. Neil Armstrong went through U.S. Customs in Honolulu, Hawaii on the way back from the moon. Number 13. You get a fractal tattoo after being struck by lightning. It's called a Lichtenberg figure. Number 12. Figs have dead wasps inside them. This is because wasps crawl inside, lay their eggs, and die. In doing so, they help to pollinate and are eventually digested by the fig's enzymes. Number 11. At launch, the iPhone had the same computing power as NASA in 1969 when it launched the historical manned mission to the moon. Number 10. Elvis was a natural blonde. Number 9. The song Happy Birthday to You is copyrighted. Number 8. The average chocolate bar contains 8 insect parts. Number 7. Saudi Arabia imports camels from Australia. Number 6. The song Coconut has only 1 chord in the entire song. It is the only song without any chord changes to reach the Billboard Hot 100 chart. It reached number 8 in 1972. Number 5. A supersonic jet once broke the sound barrier over a field of turkeys. The sonic boom gave the turkeys a heart attack, killing all of them. Number 4. If you had a long enough straw, you could only suction water upwards the length of 10 meters. After that, water spontaneously would boil. Number 3. Alpacas can die of loneliness. When bought, they always need to be bought in pairs. Number 2. Gary Newman is older than Gary Oldman. And number 1. If you do not have a child, you will be the first in your direct lineage all the way back to the beginnings of human history to do so.
All right, well, I hope you found some of those facts kind of interesting. I thought some of them were quite astounding. And so, again, some people had a hard time and still today have a hard time believing that Jesus could have been raised from the dead, that he rose from the dead. Sometimes today you'll hear Christians say, he is risen. And then if they say that to another Christian, a Christian will say, he is risen indeed. And so maybe you can do that today. Maybe you can say to somebody, he is risen, and they might say to you, he is risen indeed. Well, we want to be able to share this great news with other people, because it's the best news since the history of mankind. And so I've got just a fun little experiment here that you can also do at home. You should have these materials at home maybe. Of course, you'd want to make sure you have mom or dad's supervision before you would do anything like this. But we're going to imagine that this cup here is going to represent our tomb. And so we're going to put, there's our tomb, and we're going to put this little drop of yellow food coloring into our tomb, and that's going to represent Jesus. So we're putting Jesus in the tomb. He's been crucified on the cross, and we're putting him in the tomb, and that represents Jesus being in our tomb. And then I've got some little bleach crystals here. Now you can do this with regular household bleach if you don't have bleach crystals at home. But I'm going to take just a little quarter teaspoon of those bleach crystals, and I'm going to put them in here, and then we're going to see what Mary Magdalene and the disciples saw when they came to the tomb where they expected to find Jesus' body. They're going to find that Jesus' body was gone because he had been resurrected. And so we can see that our yellow has disappeared because that represents that Jesus has been resurrected. And as that sits there a little bit, that's going to clear up and become more clear. It's kind of cloudy right now, but it'll get cleared up here in a little bit as soon as everything settles in there. So that's just a simple little way that you could tell other people about the resurrection of Christ. So again, we just put a little bit of water in here, and then I put a drop of yellow food coloring to represent our Jesus inside our tomb. And then I took some bleach and just mixed it in there, and that bleach had a chemical reaction with the yellow in the water and cleared up that water. And so you can see then our Jesus rose from the dead. Guys, I hope you have a wonderful, happy Easter. I miss seeing you in person, but I'm so glad that we can still study the scriptures together this way. So let's have a little prayer, and then that'll be our lesson for this week. Dear Lord, I'm so thankful for the resurrection. I'm so thankful for salvation that comes through Christ because he conquered sin when he rose from the dead. Just so grateful for the truth of his word. And I pray that you would help each one of the kids to walk with you all the days of their lives. I ask that you would help us to be able to share the good news of the resurrection with other people too. In Jesus' name, amen. Bye, guys. Talk to you next week.